project has gone through a lot of changes since it began. Can you share a little bit about what you had accomplished in the face-to-face rehearsal before everything shifted and the project had to take on an alternative delivery?
I can speak on the music side. Literally the very last rehearsal before the weekend that the whole COVID isolation sort of exploded, we announced that we had officially learned all of the music in the show. So they had officially learned the whole show musically, and a lot of the students were off book and kind of ready to go, and the ensemble numbers were sounding really good. So we had at least made a huge dent in the music side of the show to kind of put it on its feet that next week.
And the students had been learning choreography outside of context, just learning the movements with our assistant choreographer. And I came in and I had one rehearsal, just a 2-hour rehearsal on our feet. And the next day was sort of the cutoff day where we had to no longer gather. So yeah, 2-hour rehearsal with the students was all I had.
Well, having been there with Heather when we announced that we had to suspend classes and seeing the profound disappointment of how much they'd invested in having this opportunity, and seeing how worried they were for how we were going to be able to move forward. I'm curious to know how it was for you when you were suddenly struck with the idea that you had to, in a very short period of time, completely reimagine how to move this project forward.
Well, Heather and I met, well, not in person, but sort of chatted, and kind of just started to brainstorm. It was a slow process to get to where we are today because there were so many factors, as everyone knows. Every day we were learning new information about what we could do, what we couldn't do, etc. At the same time, you know, students were moving back home to where they're from because they knew it would now be in a digital version. So there was kind of this, you know, week or two process where the students were wrapping up their regular classes, and we were sort of just formulating how this could work and to what degree we wanted to work with this material. You know, obviously we're not going to be able to stage a full realized musical. So what can we achieve in 3 weeks of digital rehearsals, and what would that look like?
With the musical being essentially an eighth of the year in terms of their overall program hours, what became really apparent quickly that week in March was that we needed to let them complete the primary part of the program so that those things were behind them. But then we were going to have to definitely come up with a way of giving them performance related hours. And that was, I think, probably in my heart in the initial few days. I thought, well, if we can even just separate them and keep working on material, maybe by the middle of April, we'll be able to bring them back together and we could do some version of this in a smaller venue. But it just seemed like hourly those options diminished, and we ended up in the situation that we're in now, which was it's all going to be digital. So I think just seeing a little bit of some of the ideas that were floating out there was inspiration, and then also just being very aware that our students have, you know, some skills in video, and obviously it's a good way for them to get used to even exploring that side in a bigger capacity than the college often gives them. So I think there are some wins that we were able to sort of think if we did this, this could happen. And yeah, and we just kind of had to dive in and try it, because I think there were some things we really didn't know, like, can you have a music rehearsal all together on screen? On our very first day, we realized, no, we tried to sing happy birthday to one of the students all together, and it was a cacophony of disastrous sounds. So we're like, okay, so all of the music is going to have to be learned individually, and then we're going to have to bring it all into the room, you know, through video together. And then, you know, we sort of started exploring how do we block and how do we create this thing on it, you know, at what point do you start? So our first number, we dove in and tried it one way. We learned some things, and then we started applying some different techniques with all the subsequent numbers.
So this has sort of shifted now to, in some ways, a Newsies-inspired performance portfolio, but that also moves beyond some of the Newsies content. because I can imagine, obviously, to keep 51 students really engaged and deliver the full musical would be really challenging. And so can you tell us a little bit about some of the components of the performance portfolio? And then I'd love to chat a little bit more about how the sort of the devised components of Newsies distilled themselves out of that.
It has been my goal this year to give a little bit more to the whole body of students for the year in musical, because the challenge is obviously you have leads that get a lot more stage time and rehearsal time, and then an ensemble that is larger than most who get less time. So that has been a challenge over the last few years. And so this year I was already starting to think of ways that we could engage them in extra things. So fortunately, that had already been brewing in my head, and this idea of a performance portfolio that they submit at the end and would actually be graded on was there. This just sort of forced it into more of an urgent state. So we've developed basically some written components. So reflection on process, reflections on what inspires them as artists, and reflections on who they are as an individual artist. We've asked them to write in the form of submitting a bio of their lives, which is writing a bio is something all artists need to be able to do. Putting together a strong resume and headshot and having that digitally submitted. And then we also encouraged each of them to work on one musical number that they hadn't done at all and get some coaching on that and do their own, essentially offering what will be ideally a video, something that they could use for an audition reel at the end of one piece. So that gave everybody something specific to work on. And then we were able to take the year 2 class who are doing a grad showcase. We were able to assimilate that into the performance portfolio and get them to videotape those, which we would have done, but we had to lose that event at the end of March. And then, yeah, we sort of then took what would have been Newsies and morphed that down into something that they could create and collaborate on by video.
When it became apparent that some of them were dealing with better internet than others or better devices than others, and some were more isolated than others, and that everyone's functioning in a potentially very different environment, to try to get them to think creatively outside the box to deliver some of that performance portfolio in whatever mediums they felt that they could really embrace and deliver under their isolated circumstances.
Kind of level the playing field a little bit so that they all felt they had equal advantage to succeed. I think that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Jessica, I'm curious how you would have changed your approach interacting with them in terms of directing scenes or acting in a digital format.
We chose to start with just a couple songs from the show that we would do with the full company, Seize the Day and Carrying the Banner. And both of those songs have scene work, dialogue between characters that occurs within, in between the singing. So a big question going in for me was, can we do this? Can we actually act out a scene with people in different locations? And if they were to film themselves separately doing these scenes, would it read when we edit those videos together that they are speaking to each other? So it turned into a very complex process that we're still trying to figure out, because as all actors and directors know, that there's an energy, a conversation quality that occurs in dialogue. You can't just ask one actor to record all of their lines in a scene and then chop that up and then insert the other character's lines. And that's not going to feel, there's no, natural cadence to the text. There's nothing to bounce off of. So I've gone through a series of trials, but basically I would have them do the scene for me in Zoom. And I found a way where I could actually invite them into a breakout room in a certain order, which would allow them to appear on my screen as the director in the composition that we were planning for the film. Meaning that I could direct them like, okay, from my perspective, Catherine is on your left. And then I would guide them on like, no, if you tilt your head slightly to the right, that reads more as you looking at her, because they're just staring at their wall in their bedroom.
And for them, how did they give focus in a scene when they're
yes. Exactly. And then we would rehearse the scene with them alone staring at their wall, but then they would be able to hear the other person's lines and they'd get a sense of the cadence of the natural scene. And then I would sometimes actually just record, like we're doing now, the Zoom conversation. And if there was no lag, then I would be able to sort of then just use that audio to, put into the film. But then came the challenge of when they go to film, they now have to act and their mouth has to move at the same time as their pre-recorded audio, which is a huge nightmare. When you're singing, that's really possible because there's a metered, you can sing the notes on the beat. But when you're doing dialogue, that's impossible. So anyways, there's a series of trial and error where we tried different ways of them recording their dialogue separately, mashing those together, then rehearsing with that mashed together piece. And it was a very, very complex. So we realized that actually singing is much simpler than dialogue to achieve. Also, because when you're singing, you can generally direct address and just sing towards the camera. But when you're in a scene with another person, you sort of have to interact with them. Not always. We did some scenes where you can just both are facing straight out and it reads as them speaking to each other. But it definitely took a lot of trial and error to navigate that. And I think for the students, generally the feeling is underwhelming, because they're just alone in their room talking to themselves. At the end of the day, that's what it is, right? There's no energy exchange. There's nothing that they receive back.
And harder to be accurate to your partner, and you're not receiving.
No, and you're not in essence of acting. You're not really present, and you're not really listening because there's no one there. You're just speaking your lines almost like a robot. So, the degree of success of that within our final product, I think, is varying. But yeah, ultimately, it just emphasized what we all know, which is that you need other people to act with. Yeah. But that being said, the singing and the choreography and the musical components of the songs were much more achievable to sort of film independently, rehearse the choreography, and then have them individually film that at home and submit it. And then it really becomes about the composition of editing them all together.
And were you able to hold on to some of your original scope of the choreography, or did that have to change as well?
90% of it did change. A lot of people didn't have enough room in their individual homes to do full body choreography. So I modified almost all of it to be upper body, which is quite limiting. Some of them also weren't able to turn around because of like where their chair was situated, or they couldn't get their camera to a high enough height to be standing. So it was kind of a case by case. We had to sort of, work with each of them individually to see what was, possible for them. We did do some outdoor shots, but then some of them have gone home and are, there's 2 feet of snow. So I'm saying to Greg, who's up in Whitehorse, if you could just film this outside. And he's like, well, it's a little trickier for me than it is in Victoria in the, the glorious sunshine. So yeah, we had to sort of work with each of the students individually on that, on how they could film those scenes.
Well, I joined you there on the first day of rehearsals, and got to hear sort of a bit of, prefacing it that it's an experiment and that we're all going to learn this together and see how we move through this and discover what works and discover what doesn't. And so I'm a little curious to know, what do you feel maybe surprised you and that it maybe worked better than you thought, or areas where you thought things would be really difficult and they actually were quite doable? Were there some pleasant surprises that came out of it?
Absolutely. One of my favorite moments, one of our previous alumni who just graduated from Company C, Pedro, has been on our video editing team. And after working on Seize the Day, which was our first number, where we allowed people to film wherever they were, he sort of brainstormed with me a concept where, what if every student was able to create like a really dark background behind them, and was to try and really focus their lighting in on their face so that they become the subject instead of, a mix match of background surroundings. So we tasked the students with doing that. We made them, we gave them an afternoon to figure out how they were going to do that in their own home, hang black fabric or find different ways to do that. And they had to take a screenshot of themselves in their lighting. And then our tech team sort of came back to them, RJ and Pedro, and came back to them and said, a little bit more light on your face, or I can see something in the background. But what it resulted in for carrying the banner, which was our second big number, was this incredibly beautiful aesthetic where we have all these newsies that are 100% lit and focused, and we have just a sort of a neutral black behind them. And I was just amazed at how it didn't matter that we weren't in New York City, or that we weren't like, you know, that whole number is about like traveling the streets of New York. So it became just this beautifully black, you know, blank canvas where it became, you know, we zoomed in on the students' performance almost in a close-up. And I just loved that because it just removed context and it just really focused in on the students themselves, and it allowed us to imagine that they're everywhere. And all of a sudden it looks like this completely professionally edited film because we took away all of the variation of their locations. Like, I think actually watching that product, you would think that those students were all in, you know, a studio shooting it together, but they are in like, you know, 50 different locations, and yet there's a cohesiveness to it that I think is like stunning.
That's amazing. And I'm sure nobody imagined at the beginning of this process that we would be involving drones either.
Yeah, absolutely not. Fortunately, we have a faculty member who had a drone and just, you know, wanted to test it out. So we borrowed a drone, and that's been certainly an added bonus. It's, you know, we're not using it a lot, but we have definitely been able to explore technology to its surprising nth degree.
Mm-hmm.
And it allowed us to get some really interesting shots of the college, you know, of the building that they all normally visit for 12 hours a day, you know, and I think there's an element of this project too that, you know, I attended CCPA and we did, you know, a year in production, but it was, you know, back in the, like, there might be a VHS of it just to date myself a bit, you know, but I don't know where that is. I'm not going to go find it 15 years later and say, oh, remember when I was in CCPA and I made all those, you know, amazing friendships and I performed and I was training. But these students, unlike any other year, are going to get this incredible digital version of their final 3 weeks at the college. So including, you know, drone footage of the building and of interior inside the building. And I think that they're going to cherish those memories for a long time and have, you know, really beautiful shots of that process.
Absolutely. Well, a couple days from now, Friday night, is the official digital opening. And because a Zoom session allows 100 people, we have approximately just over 50 students and 50 invited guests to participate in the Zoom opening. What can our online audience maybe expect to experience?
We did a test run of it today with the students, sort of how that would work, you know, how we would view things, and how that would be for those guests. So we're working out some technical kinks. The content will be, you know, 6 or 7 numbers, musical numbers from Newsies that have all been staged with different concepts. So for example, Seize the Day was our first number. So we really wanted to get the students comfortable with filming themselves. So we did an absolute spoof on that number. It could not be farther from the actual context of Newsies. Then on the opposite end of that spectrum, we did Carrying the Banner, where we tried to really honor the characters and the stories that the students had been working on, and we set it completely in the same context as the musical. And then there's a bunch of solos and duets and quartets in the middle of there that they've all been working on as well, just also to just document and honor the work that the students that were cast as leads have put into those roles. So it's going to be a big mix, probably 5 or 6 numbers over the course of maybe 40, 45 minutes to an hour worth of content, which is pretty incredible considering, you know, how much time we had to put this all together.
Absolutely. Is there anything both of you would like to add that I haven't addressed that has been a standout moment for you?
I've been really proud of our students for rising through whatever this is. This COVID isolation and finding a way to stay creative and stay motivated, because I know it's been a big challenge, and that I know that there was so much that they had invested and were building to that end of year, and it just feels like it all just got taken, which it did. And I think that given the option of going one direction or the other, I think the students kind of hit a bit of a crossroads and had to make choices to invest and just trust us and do it. I know for myself, there's been something really rewarding about getting up each day and flipping my computer on and having 51 faces looking back at me like, okay, I'm ready to go. What do you have for me today? I mean, there has been something kind of
you don't feel so isolated.
yeah, and I have a feeling that although I know it's been a lot of work, and I know that some of them are, you know, hanging in there to the end, I have a feeling that on Monday morning there's going to be 51 people or 57 people kind of all going, oh, that was it, it's over. And so it is interesting that no matter how we slice it, this industry that we're in, you build and build and build, and then it finishes and you're left with the memory of it. And I do really love that, as Jessica said, we wouldn't necessarily have the memory that we could carry with us and watch for the next little while out of a year-end show. You sort of leave that on the stage, but I think there's something kind of beautiful about this. And I'm also just really proud of all areas of the college, administratively through you know, RJ and Pedro just tackling huge learning curves on technical, and Jackie diving in and doing stage management from her office at home through a screen. I just think like we've all kind of gone, okay, that's a no, but this is what we've got to do. And yeah, I just think it takes a village. They say that, and I think it does. And I'm really proud of CCPA for letting this happen, enabling this to happen. I think it's been a really good learning curve, and some things that I, you know, professionally, I will take away from this and probably carry over into lots of environments that I go into.
Absolutely. Well, I applaud you both for adjusting the vision and rolling with it and finding a way to carry the banner forward and turn this into something that is really memorable under the most difficult circumstances. So thank you both for all your hard work, and I'm very proud of the students as well. So I look forward to seeing it all.